Let me introduce this chapter by saying when I looked back over my life, I discovered something curious. Some of the best things that ever happened to me began with disappointment. At the time, I couldn't see it. All I saw was another closed door. Years later, I realized those closed doors had simply pointed me toward better ones. This chapter is about one of those closed doors. Chapter 6. Closed doors can lead to opportunities. When one door closes, don't stand there staring at it. Start looking for another. Shipboard electronics technician. When I joined the Navy, I trained as a fire control technician. Despite the name, the trade had nothing to do with fighting fires. We maintained the sophisticated electronic systems used to control the ship's guns. These systems used a tracking radar to follow a target and analog computers to calculate where the guns needed to aim. My job, as part of the maintenance team, was to keep this complex vacuum tube equipment operating reliably at sea. General ship duties. In addition to working as a technician, I took my turn doing a number of general tasks. All members of the ship's company stood watches. These are rotational duties when at sea. These watches involved a number of positions that we rotated through, such as steering the ship, acting as lookouts at the top of the ship, and acting as a lifebuoy sentry at the back of the ship. This is where we watched for anyone falling overboard. It was the responsibility we took seriously, particularly in rough weather. A sobering introduction to life at sea. A week before joining my first ship, HMCS Assiniboine, a young weapons surface able seaman went up the upper deck during rough weather to clear his head from seasickness. He was washed overboard when a wave hit the ship and washed him under the torpedo tubes into the ocean. Although the lifebuoy sentry sounded the alarm and the ship turned around to search for him, he was never found. Interesting, though, I was assigned his bunk when I joined the ship a week later, and I watched as the coxswain cut the lock off his locker and cleaned it out. A dangerous environment. I very much enjoyed the work I was doing aboard ship as an electronics technician. However, I learned much later that in doing so, I was exposed to a number of cancer-causing chemicals, like trichloroethylene, carbon tetrachloride, and PCBs. I recall being sent to the half deck, where the fire control radar transmitter was located, to clean up oil from a blown transformer. I simply wiped it up with paper towel and stuffed it into the plastic garbage bag and threw it over the side when finished. The cooling oil from the transformer contained polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. What we didn't know at the time is that PCBs were highly toxic. Exposure to PCBs can suppress the human immune system and lead to various health problems, including severe acne, liver damage, thyroid issues, and increased risk of cancer. I was also extensively used carbon tetrachloride to clean components in the computer on a regular basis. This chemical was banned a few years later when it was discovered that it caused cancer. This is something I'll get into later. Envisioning the future. Several years later, after reaching the rank of leading seaman, I found myself one day chipping paint on the forecastle. That's the pointy end of the ship for those who don't speak Navy. I looked around at the men who had been doing much the same thing for the last 10 to 15 years, and I had a thought. I don't want to be doing this 10 years from now. The problem was I still didn't have a high school diploma. If I wanted a different future, I would first have to create the qualifications to reach it. I see we've reached another Krampus signpost. This one says, "Don't wait for your future to change. Start building it." This one is so important. If you want things to change, you've got to get off the couch and make it happen. And that's exactly what I did. I began taking correspondence courses through the Radio College of Canada while at sea. When the ship was alongside, I attended night school. One course at a time, I completed the requirements I had failed to achieve as a teenager. 3 years later, I had my high school diploma. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I wanted to become, a combat systems engineer. He was responsible for all of the electronic systems aboard the ship. He wasn't my boss. He wasn't even my boss's boss. He was my boss's boss's boss. And one day, I intended to have his job. Yet another roadblock. Just when I thought things were finally going my way, life presented me with what appeared to be an insurmountable obstacle. I had applied for a commissioning program, the University Training Plan for Men, a program I felt I was well suited for, given my recent academic achievements. I received a letter from the program on a Friday afternoon. I opened the envelope expecting good news. Instead, I found one word that changed everything: rejected. For a few minutes, I just stared at the letter. 3 years of night school, 3 years of correspondence courses, 3 years of believing I was finally moving forward, and now another roadblock. I gave myself one evening to be disappointed and drowned my sorrows over a beer at the Fleet Club. The next morning, I returned to a question that had served me since childhood. Is there another way? I see another one of those Grampus signposts. I wonder what words of wisdom he has to share with us today. This one says, rejection closes one door. It doesn't lock all the others. The alternative route. Not being one to be discouraged by rejection, I immediately looked for a way around this latest roadblock. I began by researching the requirements to become a combat systems engineer, and I discovered that the Navy also accepted people into the combat systems engineering program with only a college diploma in electronics. But how could I obtain an electronics diploma? After doing more research, I discovered that the Navy had a program that allowed people to temporarily leave without pay for educational purposes. I also learned that a local college, the Nova Scotia Institute of Technology, offered the perfect course, a 2-year program in electronics technology. So I decided to take leave from the Navy without pay and attend the Nova Scotia Institute of Electronic Technology to obtain that college diploma. However, without an income, this would be very difficult. Not to be discouraged, I applied for government bursaries and student loans. Given this, and largely due to my wife's income, I managed to survive for the first year. However, survival for the second year of this 2-year program was very uncertain due to my economic challenges. So once again, I applied for the University Training Plan for Men to see if the Navy would accept me now. To my pleasant surprise, they did. However, there was a catch. A slight change in plans. Military college. I thought the Navy was going to pay for my final year of my electronics technology program. Instead, they sent me all the way across the country to Royal Roads Military College in Victoria, British Columbia for a 4-year degree program. Royal Roads Military College. Almost immediately, I began struggling. 7 full courses at military college were very different from correspondence courses in night school. Before long, I found myself falling behind. The doubt returned. Maybe the psychologist had been wrong. Maybe I really wasn't smart enough. I wanted to give up and return to the ship. Then I remembered something he had taught me years earlier. Don't study the way everyone else studies. Study the way you learn. So I decided to apply the lessons I learned from the Navy psychologist who taught me how to learn several years ago. To achieve this, I put together study groups where we would discuss the problems as a group. I had people asking me about certain problems in physics and math, and I would respond by asking them, give me the problem in your own words. Once they did that, I found that I could easily discuss the solutions. As a result of applying this method, my grades improved. I moved from the bottom of the class to near the top. By the end of the 4th year, I was the top student in my class, and I graduated with distinction. 4 years earlier, I'd entered Royal Roads Military College believing I might not survive the first semester. Now I stood at graduation at the top of my class. The boy who once believed he wasn't smart enough had become an engineer. Looking back, I don't think the difference was intelligence. The difference was perseverance. I had finally learned how to learn. At the time, I thought the biggest roadblocks were finally behind me. I was wrong. Let's take a minute to reflect on this important chapter. Looking back today, I sometimes smile when people describe successful careers as straight lines. Mine certainly wasn't. It zigzagged. It doubled back. It ran into dead ends. And more than once, I had to start over. But every closed door forced me to ask a better question. What's another way? I've come to believe that rejection is often life's way of redirecting us toward a better solution. Not easier, better. Now for my letter to Marlies. Dear Marlies, there will probably be times in your life when you work hard for something, do everything you think is right, and still heard the word no. I did, and more than once. After spending 3 years earning a high school diploma, I failed to complete as a teenager, I applied for the Navy program that I believed would take me toward becoming an engineer. They rejected me. I could have accepted their decision as proof I just wasn't meant to be one. Instead, after one evening of disappointment, I began looking for another way. The path I eventually found wasn't the path I had planned. In fact, it took me across country and presented challenges I never expected. But it led me to exactly where I wanted to go. So, when a door closes, Marlies, allow yourself to be disappointed. That's human. Just don't spend so much time staring at that closed door that you fail to notice another door opening nearby. And when you find that door, have the courage to walk through it. With love, Grandpa. P.S. Sometimes rejection forces you onto a better path than the one you had originally planned. Now, that journey through this chapter taught me something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Rejection doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong path. Sometimes it simply means you need to find another path. And sometimes that alternative route takes you somewhere better than you ever expected. But as I learned, there are still plenty of roadblocks waiting ahead. In the next chapter, I'll begin the journey that took me from being a young electronics technician to becoming a leader, and along the way, I would discover that leadership has very little to do with rank. By now, I'd learned that a roadblock didn't necessarily mean I had reached the end of the road. Sometimes, I simply needed to find another way. But there was always another lesson waiting for me. Sometimes the problem isn't that you can't find the answer. Sometimes you're asking the wrong question. I learned that lesson while working on a graduate project involving submarines in the Arctic, and a problem that initially appeared impossible.